All right, good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're very honored to be here tonight with all of you, in person and virtually, to celebrate We Pursue Our Magic, a spiritual history of Black feminism. We are here with the author, Marina Magloire, in conversation with Holly A. Smith. And I'm going to introduce Holly first. Holly A. Smith is the college archivist at Spelman College. She co-authored the article, This Black Woman's Work, Exploring Archival Projects That Embrace the Identity of the Memory Worker, and authored the piece, And Wholeness is No Trifling Matter, Black Feminist Archival Practice in the Spelman College Archives. She is passionate about Black feminist archival practice and archival advocacy related to collections for historically underdocumented communities. We're very lucky to have her in our community and so glad she is here with us tonight. And the person of the hour tonight is Marina, who is a Black feminist scholar, writer, and educator with roots in the Caribbean. She is currently assistant professor of English at Emory University and is the co-founder of Third World Feminist School, a popular education project for workers in South Florida. The book we are celebrating tonight, We Pursue Our Magic, A Spiritual History of Black Feminism, is from UNC Press, and it is her first book. So thank you all so much for being with us. I want to encourage folks to ask questions when the time comes, and if you're here with us physically in the room, just raise your hand and I'll bring a microphone to you. And if you are watching virtually, just pop your question in the chat and we will verbalize it for you so that your voice can be heard in the room. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Holly A. Smith. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, E.R., so much. Everyone can hear me okay? Perfect. We'll just want to really start by acknowledging when we talk about archives and memory workspace, right, and just the sacred space that we're in Charis Books, and to thank E.R., my beloved sister colleague and comrade Dartricia, and all the incredible colleagues we have here for this opportunity, for this conversation. And I'm just beyond thrilled and honored and delighted to be here with my dear sister colleague, Marina, to talk about her incredible work. And I just want to start us by saying, just as we're kind of talking about, you know, Marina's work, spirituality, Black feminist, and Black feminist archival practice, because I just can't wait to get into your thoughts around that. Just to ground us in the space that is Spelman Archives, it's refreshing to not have to justify why Black women and Black people are important. So that's the refreshing thing about the space of Spelman College, founded the space itself, the idea of keeping the archives on Spelman's College campus, conceived by my mentor and supervisor, Dr. Beverly Sheftel, and having an archives connected to the radical progressive Black feminist space on campus is a unique opportunity. But last year when Marina came in person, because we had corresponded during the pandemic and, you know, we're able to share things. But last year when she and another friend and comrade came, it was a bit of a challenging time personally. And, you know, I think we're always taught to not be as, you know, well, this is work. You know, I'm just providing archives or passive keepers of dead records. And you're you know, almost like you're not acknowledging the humanity of you as the person and who is represented in the papers. And on the last, Marina, I think you were there a week or 2 weeks, and you know, just the bonds that we were able to create, the friendship. I'm a chatter, as you can tell, and the friendship with she and Helen. But on the last day, they bought me a beautiful vase of flowers. And that really touched my, you know, just something, just an act of sisterhood, of kindness, of love to really uplift you. You're not expecting it. And I still have that vase. And my beloved mother passed in March. So I decided I dried some flowers from every bouquet of anyone that I have gotten, and I keep them in that vase. So just to ground us in the idea of radical revolutionary love, being a part of Black feminist archival practice. And Marina, I don't know if I ever shared what that really meant to me then. And well, I'm a crier. Do we have any tissues? What it meant to me now. So just thank you for the exemplifying how we should be and we should be our authentic whole selves in these spaces. And I'm grateful that we have the space tonight, and hopefully that Spelman can serve at one of these spaces. You got some tissue? Just in case.
Oh goodness.
But so we can marinate on that. But thank you. I'll just keep this here between us. But I would just love, if you don't mind, just to get us started here tonight. And with our thank you to everyone joining online. Would you mind talking about your process of researching and preparing this book? Because it's such an incredible topic to think about, the genealogy of spirituality and Black feminism.
Yes. Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, I first of all want to thank you just for the kind of unparalleled space that you curate at Spelman. I work with a lot of archives, and I can't say I've been to another. I think it's kind of the aspiration for what I would like to see in all archives. Even just spatially, the setup of the kind of kitchen table setup, it really actually reminds me of the kitchen table photo series, right? You know, just kind of so many iterations of the researcher and her community around her, like at that table, is just a goal of archival space. But we'll talk more about that later, I know. So as far as my own process goes, I think the project actually started out when I was in grad school because I was really interested in parties. In literature, I was reading a lot of modernist literature and noticing that people were just in the 1920s literature, especially like across racial spectrums, whoever was writing, whether it was Nella Larson, whether it was F. Scott Fitzgerald, people were really looking for something in parties, like looking for some kind of spiritual transcendence in parties. And I was like, what are people doing here? You know, like like I would find these really unexpected parallels between, you know, Virginia Woolf and Harlem Renaissance literature. It was just kind of like very interesting. The focal space of the party, I was like, what were people looking for, and why were they looking for it at this moment in the 1920s? And I realized actually that the 1920s was kind of the heyday of the US's occupation of Haiti, right? So US Marines were kind of bringing back all these stories about Haitian religion and bringing back a lot of religious artifacts that, you know, were being stolen and decontextualized, like drums, rattles, etc. So it was like a kind of garbled narrative from these US Marines that was obviously racist and untrue, but clearly they were fascinated on the ground, and they also kind of projected this idea onto Black Americans that Black Americans have this special connection with music or with spirituality that can be kind of unlocked in particular spaces like a party or like a club. So I think Black writers of the time period really started playing with this, but then what I started realizing from some of my favorite Black writers of the time period, like Hurston, like Dunham, like Larson, unfortunately does not figure largely in the book, but I really love her. I think every time they were in these party spaces feeling confronted with this, like, oh, maybe I can access this ancestral, I can access this ancestral connection to spirituality to an embodied spirituality through music, they always fell short. It was like every time they were like, yeah, going back to Africa in the club. And then it was like, no, actually, I can't do that. So I think initially I was like, what were people looking for? And why was it, you know, why was writing, it was like this weird circular thing where writing by white people would be like, Black people have this naturally, but writing by Black people would be like, we have been told we have this naturally, but actually it's, you know, we're not feeling it in the club. We want to feel it. We want spiritual transcendence, but we are having just as hard of a time accessing it as anybody else. So that was kind of, I think, my initial research question, maybe. I don't know. I guess that's not really answering the process part, but
no, but that, you know, it makes me think even now the kind of conversations around almost like what is authenticity, right?
Mhm.
Essentialism, what connects us across the African diaspora, but what are the uniquenesses and differences? So I think I have that also in the question, but and we don't have to, be strict because we know how we can go on discussion. But I think your question, what you were talking about your process, leads perfectly into this next question: are the relationships? And I was curious about what relationships did you see emerge from the archives among the women you wrote about, but just the relationships that you saw emerge in the archives, and then maybe even about your own relationship to these archives. The relationships that we build, right, with these, and what do we come with this experience in terms of archives?
Yes, it was. Well, I think maybe the most famous, or actually, well, maybe not necessarily famous, because I don't know. I mean, I know Zora Neale Hurston is a relatively well-known figure, and most people have read Their Eyes Were Watching God. Not a lot of people have read her Haitian ethnography, but she had a very famous beef with Katherine Dunham, who I also wrote a chapter about.
Which I did not know until I read the archival tea.
The archival tea. I think that was it's like archival cocktail party talk, I guess. But they really said some mean things about each other. They were like intentionally misspelling each other's names in in articles about each other. Zora Neale Hurston was like, "Oh, Katherine Dunham has so much less experience than me, but she's still getting all these opportunities." And I think in the book itself, I say Katherine Dunham, I think, also felt competitive at the time, but then later she lived much longer than Zora Neale Hurston. So later in her life, she was like, well, who told me I was going to be the only little Black girl in anthropology? So actually a lot of their strife was because they were kind of there really was only one slot, like literally for funding. Part of the beef was that Hurston was promised some funding from the Rosenwald Foundation, but then it was actually given to Dunham. Like, not Dunham, obviously that wasn't her fault, but just kind of the scarcity of resources and the way people had to exceptionalize themselves to access them and be like, I am the most different, special Black person. Like, really, I think resonated with me for our kind of current representational politics, like the climate of our current representational politics. Like, I'll tell anybody who will listen that I'm like, we're in a new Harlem Renaissance, but it's not going to last. Just like the Harlem Renaissance, like, people are obviously always going to continue making art and being in conversation with each other. Like, Black art didn't disappear after 1929. People didn't stop writing. People didn't die. After the stock market crash, it was just a lot of the funding opportunities and interest from white readers disappeared. So I think a lot of that background resource scarcity is what creates these tensions between people. And I've seen a lot of those tensions, unfortunately, in my own life. And, even having lived most recently in Miami, I think Miami is very much, city of immigrants, I think majority foreign born population. And, I did have friends who were born in other countries, but then I also had a lot of friends who were born here. And I could see the kind of pressure to be like, if people were like, where are you from? They would always say where their parents are from, for example. Or sometimes even I have a real resistance to, like, both my parents are immigrants, but I have a real resistance to saying where my parents are from as where I'm from, because I wasn't born there, But so I really noticed that people would really push me sometimes and be like, no, but where are you from? And not in the racist white people way, but in a kind of way to, it was like my inclusion in community was kind of contingent on me naming where my people are from. But, but I always felt squirrely about it because I'm like, well, I don't want to, my dad's Venezuelan Haitian, my mom's from Martinique. It's like, I don't want to appropriate the experience of my own family members who actually had a quite different experience than me. So it's like existential crisis every time, obviously, the question comes up. But I noticed that there's a real, right now, there's like a real, I think just because of the way funding and resource allocation goes within universities, within grant funding, within within the arts world. I think there is a real pressure to kind of flatten out nuance and just say where your parents are from and claim that as your experience without qualification, or you're not always given the opportunity for nuance in like a grant application or a other types of applications or fellowship materials.
No, absolutely. And when you said, I was beyond thrilled. Well, I don't know, thrilled. I was just amazed about the tension. I shouldn't say I wasn't thrilled about, but I was just thrilled about this exploration of also the humanity of people, right? And trying to understand the layers of authenticity, I call it the Hunger Games mentality when it comes to funding, especially, for I couldn't imagine for Black women at that time. And even seeing that scarcity mindset of like, when you being the only one or the only one focusing on this. But speaking of which, we didn't plan this, y'all. Like, I'm like, Marina's leading perfectly into the next question. So again, we're operating with scarcity of resources. And also that makes me think of scarcity of archival resources. So we know the dearth of resources that can be, relate to people of the African diaspora from a number of reasons. That's everything from benign neglect to intentional erasure. And there's violence in being able to erase, suppress, destroy, ignore somebody's history. And so while it is beyond important to recognize the scarcity across institutions, right? Not saying that there's the erasure at predominantly white institutions, but that doesn't mean because I work at HBCU, there isn't a erasure of a certain type of Black person, Black woman, you know? So how do we not participate in that? So, but you said something the last time we were talking that I loved, and you talked about the archival abundance. And when there's, just instead of operating, we understand why there's a lack, but what happens when we also channel the abundance? Because I was like, this is a feast, an archival feast to understand more about the Zora Neale Hurston, Katherine Dunham, but leaning into your chapter on Lucille Clifton's spiritual writings. It was amazing. So if you don't mind maybe expanding on that idea from scarcity, and that doesn't ignore the real systemic oppression and erasure, but how do then we move into also the conversation of abundance to look at the breadth of resources that we have?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that and an attempt too to kind of also bring in this concept of authenticity that you just brought up as well. I mean, I think one of the things that I am pushing back on with the book is the kind of loneliness of authenticity and the loneliness of the kind of exceptional narrative. Because I think, within like a lot of our kind of most famous archival theories within Black studies are about absence. Right. It's Saidiya Hartman, it's Marissa J. Fuentes. It's about like what's not there in the archive. It's about like what we can never know. Which, yes, to be honest, I mean, I don't disagree with Hartman's premise, right? That, for especially enslaved women, right? Like the majority of there's not an existing written account of the Middle Passage by an enslaved woman, for example. Like we'll never know that experience. And the way that we see enslaved women appear in the archive is because something horrible has happened to them, usually. So I don't want to deny that really painful history, but I feel very lucky to work in 20th century archives. And, I think it's actually a different skill set that we just don't talk about as much. It's like, what do we do with absence? I feel like scholars have really grappled with that. And, Hartman, Fuentes, et cetera, have made such important contributions, but I don't see as many contributions for like, what do you do with the intimate pieces of a life that don't necessarily cohere into this like authentic, heroic narrative of like this woman survived. I mean, it's like the most intimate thing. You know, I didn't even start out working with archives, and the ones I did, I think I started out more with like Hartman-esque projects where it's like this one woman is mentioned once in Langston Hughes's autobiography, and I'm doing a reconstruction of like, you know, like what, you know, whatever, right? But when I think I really found my groove when I found archives like Hartman, or like when I found archives like Clifton's, for example, where she's literally like, how am I going to buy clothes for my children? Like, I have a crush on such and such that I saw at a conference. Like, you know, like, it's just like, and then, you know, kind of intermingled with, I interviewed Jesus the other day and he came back and like, Langston Hughes came back and wrote a poem. So it's like, and then it's like then here's the theory of Atlantis, and it's all kind of intermingled in this way that, you know, I mean, I guess that's kind of what all of our lives are like, but, you know, not many of us, I don't know, I guess maybe when we talk a little bit more, I know we'll talk a little bit more about some of my community archiving work. But I mean, I definitely try to encourage people to be archivists of their own lives, like be archivists of their own life, be archivists in the making, right? Because just seeing how beautiful it is to have as much incoherent, sometimes as much dissonant information as possible about one person, no matter what they did. I mean, I think it would be, I work with writers, but I think you know, even collections of people who are not writers, I think would just be so fascinating and moving to see, you know, just a life laid before you, and to really honor that life and to honor it in all of its complexity. I think, you know, makes us feel less alone and less inauthentic too, you know?
Absolutely. And thank you for that. And also about the humanity, right? The complexity of the human experience, because so Spelman's archives were very fortunate, blessed, speaking of spirituality, to have the papers of, you know, the iconic lesbian feminist mother warrior poet Audre Lorde and the iconic filmmaker, cultural worker Toni Cade Bambara. And sometimes, you know, I can even fall into the trap for my sheroes to forget they're human. You know, like they're flawed, you're human, or talking about everything from the grocery list to trying to buy, you know, to excerpts of a novel. I say one of my favorite things in Toni Cade Bambara, because she kept a lot of things, and just want to give a special moment of recognition to her incredible family, daughter Karma and her wonderful granddaughter Zoe, an iconic writer, for the gift of donating. Because, you know, again, there's a vulnerability and exposure in donating somebody's archives and getting to see, you know, even not so pleasant or mundane things. But that's one of the things that I've come to love and honor and respect, because sometimes I'm like, am I voyeuring when I'm looking at something? But one of the things I love about Toni Cade Bambara's papers, and one of the files or research files, it's like a random paper plate with notes. And sometimes it's like, well, why do we keep what we do? Why? But again, just whatever can see mundane or regular, it's the sum totality. And one of the things I really love in both of their collections are drafts, because you see drafts of uses of the erotic, you see drafts of the cancer journals. There's actually an early draft that I presume that would be the cancer journals, that was called Breast Cancer, a Black Lesbian Experience. And I'm like, well, what would that have meant if you know, and what were the changes? So you get, I love drafts because, again, it's all about the process. And I think it can complicate that question of, you know, authenticity, or who can represent who, or, you know, like, no, where are you really from? These questions of belonging and who belongs in an archive, who doesn't, and to just push back against that notion of just even our construction. Like you said, we all are experts in our own experience, and we're all human. That doesn't mean we're not without you know, we all can be problematic, but does that not speak to the sum totality of humanity? And don't Black women deserve to be human? I'm not playing with y'all this weekend. Not speaking church. No, but thank you for that. No, I am. I'm totally playing with y'all this evening. So again, not planned.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you for bringing up your work around community archiving, because I would love for you to talk about your work with the Third World Feminist Schools and archiving in Miami for us.
Oh my goodness. Well, I hope I'll be able to do more. Unfortunately, it's a grant-funded project, like that's dependent on one-off grants so far. Like I had a big crisis at the end. I was like, should I'd make a nonprofit or whatever? But you know, obviously,
well, we can talk about that later.
Yeah,
the creation of like,
most people were
Black
like,
Lives
no.
Matter to the end of this grant cycle or whatever, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Just kidding.
People were like, yeah, no, don't do that. But anyway, I mean, I definitely have more planned, I think, with that group of people in the future, just because, you know, that is my beloved community, although I no longer live in Miami. But I think something I was thinking about a lot in the spring when I was doing archival work with Third World Feminist School was, you know, definitely encouraging people to make their own individual archives, to consider, you know, a lot of people have more born digital materials now, for example, and just kind of encouraging people to think of those as part of their individual archive, and, you know, like what they would want to, you know, how they would want to curate their own memory for their descendants, et cetera, if they have them, but even if not, whatever. I mean, I think just kind of like I think individuals generally understood the concept, or really intuitively understood the concept that, you know, having an archive confers a kind of dignity on a person after they have passed, like whether they have biological descendants or not. But something that I was really interested in was just what it means to archive the life of a community, because University of Miami actually has some really interesting organizational archives of community organizations. And I got really deep in the organizational archives of this one organization, Power U, which now organizes high school students and public school students mostly, but used to be, I think, a little bit more general, was a little bit at the vanguard of kind of worker and tenant organization in Miami in the early 2000s. And just kind of seeing their like they really won stuff that we don't talk about anymore. And I feel like, you know, a lot of my friends are organizers in Miami, and obviously it's a really tough time in Florida politics to be an organizer. It's a really tough time to be an organizer in the world. But just kind of like, you know, even seeing the sign-up sheets for meetings. Like there's this one woman who came to like every single meeting and always did the meeting minutes, for example. Or, you know, like they have like just boxes and boxes of files of their campaign against a housing development that was going to be built in a historically Black neighborhood in Miami called Overtown. And that housing development was actually never built. So they really did, you know, like, and just kind of based on the signatures that they had, based on the testimony that they got from, like, they went to Detroit and got testimony from people whose community had been destroyed by the same housing company in Detroit. You know, like there's like letters from them. Like that campaign really worked. You know, I mean, I don't know if I didn't, and I really tried to do a little background research to see like, oh, you know, like, was the fact that the campaign worked because of Power U's advocacy? And obviously, like, development companies in Miami are never going to see that or say that, but you could see that from the archive. So just kind of thinking about, I think individual archives are really important, but I also did really want to, and still do really want to, encourage people to think of how they want their community as a whole to be represented, how they want the organizations that they're part of to be represented, whether that is your job as a nonprofit or whether you have maybe more of a social or cultural organization, like your activities like could be like the hope and the blueprint of somebody in the future. Like your activities now could be strategy for somebody later. So so that I think I definitely want to keep doing more of that kind of work. And but that was like definitely something that I actually because it's not as much in the book, but that's something that doing community archiving work with my popular education program actually taught me, or like allowed me to see in my archival explorations.
100%. Amen. Ashe and all that. The idea of archives, and another word that several friends, colleagues, comrades, such as ourselves, like to use is memory work, right?
Mhm.
Because that unites us all. You don't have to necessarily have your PhD or going, we're all invested in the work of memory, documenting people's right to forget.
Mhm.
The idea that some parts of knowledge are sacred and maybe shouldn't be accessible to everyone. So how do we co-create, right? Not co-opt, because I think that's when we think of, archives, we think about them behind, if you at all think about them behind buildings restrictions. You need this letter to get in. You need to look a certain way, be a certain way, do a type of project, instead of the idea that should be community, not co-optive. It can and should exist outside of academia. So how do we collectively do this work in a non-oppressive way that is, and I think again gets back to when I think about authenticity, but I think of transparency too, and just being able to be transparent in this work and self-aware. So thank you for that. And again, segue, I have to ask a question specifically around Audre Lorde and Toni Cade Bambara. Those chapters were just amazing. And small plug, if you haven't gotten a chance to get your copy, please do, because it is just a really wonderful exploration around, I don't know, and I can't say, I've read certainly everything about Audre Lorde and Toni Cade Bambara, but just this exploration of their own personal views and viewpoints on spirituality as a whole and how that relates to their life and work. So it's really a fascinating exploration. And I have all the questions, but we want to make sure to give room to everybody. But your work makes me think about Audre Lorde's iconic quote: "It is not our differences that divide us, but it's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." And what prompted me to think about is kind of the incredibly unique ways you talked about, this aspiration sometimes to have a universal spirituality, the ideas of connection across the diaspora, which is so important, but they could possibly essentialize and flatten the experiences, which is, I don't think the intention of, Black feminists like Toni Cade and Audre Lorde, but you caution against that. So how do you feel like that idea of trying to seek, I think, commonality, but still recognizing the uniqueness of, spiritual experience in people across the African diaspora fit in that attempt to, I think, create some sort of collectivity that binds us together, if that makes sense? That was a lot.
Thank you. No, I feel like that really cuts to the heart of, I don't know. I mean, not just this project's work, but I think I think my community work, definitely my trying to be a person in the world as well. Because I think, solidarity is maybe a little bit of an anachronistic word for some of these writers from the earlier 20th century that I'm talking about. But I think solidarity is essentially the goal, or what we would now call solidarity. And I think, it is really moving to me. Like I said, it makes me feel less alone to see the struggles of people to actually be in solidarity. Just because, I think it's very easy to have to think that you have a solidarity when it's just like based on your presumption of sameness. Like, why do we have to, why do we have to say we're the same as people just to, just to support them or to feel sympathy for them sometimes on a base level? Like, we don't have to be the same to act together and to have sympathy for one another. And I think Audre Lorde is just such an underrated theorist of difference, actually, because I think a lot of times when people will trot out her quotes, it's, to kind of, to exceptionalize her, to be like, oh, Black lesbian, she's representing the Black lesbian experience. But Audre Lorde actually did a lot of coalitional work. And I think, I got my book title from Poetry is Not a Luxury, where she talks about poetry as the way that we pursue our magic and make it realized. But I think even just like the kind of idea that you have to pursue magic, it's not inherent to you, I think is really, solidarity is kind of the same. It's not going to be inherent to you just because you're the same as somebody. What does that even mean? And I think, Audre Lorde is just such a wonderful theorist of this. And I had so many alternative titles that I might have used instead of this one, but I settled on this one. But I think my runner-up was Uneasy Blackness, I guess, because there's a poem in The Black Unicorn, right, where she talks about when you try to impale me on your lances of easy blackness, remember, I don't know, she's talking about, this kind of complicated history of people within Africa selling enslaved people as well, etc. So she's talking about this kind of primal scene of betrayal. So she's like, I think she kind of views a failure of solidarity as being the kind of primal scene of the African diaspora, right? And I think, I don't know, I think throughout the book I play a lot with uneasiness and discomfort. Those are like my favorite things to talk about. I feel like every chapter at the end it's like, surprise, you shouldn't be comfortable, surprise, it shouldn't be easy, or whatever, which I know isn't very fun. But I think we should always be suspicious when it feels too easy or too comfortable, because that just might be a sign that we actually are prioritizing sameness, or, not seeing difference in a way that ultimately doesn't help solidarity, in a way that ultimately prevents solidarity.
Absolutely. No, thank you for saying that, because I think that's one of my favorite quotes to explore. Not only does she say recognize, accept, but celebrate. And what does that mean, really? And how not to flatten someone's experience, and how we should be uncomfortable. And I just think you do such an amazing job of illustrating how particularly Zora Neale Hurston and Katherine Dunham were very uncomfortable with their experiences in Haiti, and going through the initiation processes. And perhaps because an idea, like you said, and let's essentialize the idea of like, oh, this connections across the diaspora, it's going to be familiar. And it wasn't at all. And then it's kind of like, oh, ish, it's, and
We've all
that
been
should be
there.
For doing that work. No, but then that also makes me think of that excellent quote from Toni Cade Bambara in that chapter, where essentially she was talking about the work that she had done in the Salt Eaters, but acknowledging like, this is my contribution to, talking about, third world feminist solidarity, but it might fall short.
Yeah.
But then this is left to the work of those who are after me. So that transparency, and with the Salt Eaters being probably one of my favorite novels ever, I think really my last formal question, so to speak, is channeling Sister Toni. What do you think it, channeling her quote, "Are you sure you want to be well? Wholeness is no trifling matter." So what do you think it takes for us to be whole? And how does Black, I know that's right. We can put this down, we talk about this. And that's no pressure, right? Like, this is a question I would love for us to all explore. Like, what does it mean? What does wholeness look like?
That is a question I have been pondering a lot lately, just because, I have the luxury of being able to explore that personally a little bit more, because I'm on like semi-sabbatical semester. I don't teach, so it's been kind of a time for me to have a little bit more free time to explore that question for myself, especially moving into this job at Emory, which is, for me really a dream job, like just kind of better material conditions than I had. But I've also been thinking about it a lot because my comrade Helen, who you met the first time that I came, who's a filmmaker, is making a film about Toni Cade Bambara, and kind of based loosely on the structure of the Salt Eaters, kind of burnt out activist is healed, by, in this case, the spirit of Toni Cade is actually the healer. And we're working on the script together and everything. It's gonna be amazing. But I think we've been kind of pondering, because it takes place in the present. It's an organizer who was kind of destroyed and burnt out by 2020, and then the kind of repeated hits of, the fallout of 2020, like, did things really change? Climate activism, etc. We've been thinking a lot about that question together, of what it means, of what wellness means on an individual level, especially when on a structural level, it can feel a little, because I think we both have a bit of dissatisfaction, right, with the kind of like rest is resistance, like nap ministry, etc. kind of. No offense, sorry. I know people really like that, and I'm happy to, also engage with people on that. But for me, I think rest is important, but I don't think it constitutes resistance. I think it's a necessary step in resistance, but I don't think in and of itself is resistance, because to me, wellness and wholeness is a responsibility to community. Like, if you read The End of the Salt Eaters, when Velma kind of takes off the veil, she goes back to her community. Like, she comes into herself as a leader, like she is well, so that she can better serve her people. So to me, I feel, I don't want to say that like the only reason we should be well is to serve others. But wellness is a responsibility. That's why Toni Cade describes it as weight. Right. So I think to me, truly being whole is kind of connecting your own wellness to the collective. And, just having an understanding of what you can do with your wellness in a community context is kind of true wholeness to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and I think on that ends the formal, so to speak, which we're not being formal at all, questions, but it really does. And I think that's what, to me, that quote really sums up around your work, but also the idea of the Black feminist archival practice is collective wholeness. And we don't mean wholeness, in a way of like it's comprehensive or we're trying to tell complete stories, whatever that means, but just the healing. And how healing leads to liberation, and how that leads to it for us all. And that can be achieved through, like you said, this collectively. And how I feel like it should, because I know sometimes the conversation around self-care, and there's nothing wrong with pedicures and manicures, but it's like, what does that mean and what does it look like? But how are you well enough, how you have to be well enough for yourself? And what does that mean? And how can you be well for others, for this collective healing? Yes, so incredible.
Can I read a little bit? Is that possible? Is there time before questions? Okay, yeah, just because I feel like I do think, not to spoil the end of the book, but I do want to read from the conclusion. I think whatever, conclusion is just me riffing, so I don't think it's spoiling anything. But I think, just kind of the last two questions especially just made me think about it. So I'll just read maybe a couple pages and then we can do the Q&A. It's not easy being magic. Take it from Oda Mae Brown, Whoopi Goldberg's masterful play on the trope of the Black psychic in the 1990 film Ghost. The beginning of the film finds Oda Mae peering spookily into a crystal ball and guessing, unconvincingly, the name of her client's deceased husband. She is, for all intents and purposes, a fraud. Oda Mae's contact with Patrick Swayze's character, the titular ghost, is her first inkling of any supernatural gift. Though her mother and grandmother were mediums, Oda Mae explains to the ghost, she has never been able to communicate with the dead. Rather than celebrating the unexpected emergence of her ancestral gift, she bemoans the identity of her ghost, A white guy? Why me? It is almost as though that she knows throughout the film that she will be commanded, cajoled, ventriloquized, and ultimately physically possessed by the spirit of this white man, to which she consents with, "You can use me, you can use my body." Even in the pivotal moment when the ghost possesses Oda Mae's body in order to embrace his girlfriend, also white, the viewer is not afforded the pleasure of seeing Whoopi Goldberg kissing Demi Moore, but Goldberg's body is replaced by Swayze's, and we are left to imagine the body of the magical Black intermediary who has made this white romance possible. What is the point of being magical if we can't even use our magic for our own ends? I like to imagine a scenario in which Oda Mae Brown could have shared her magic with her sisters instead, or with her Brooklyn community, who throng her parlor when they all learn she can communicate with the dead. In the film, she dismisses them all because she's too busy with the demands of the ghost of a white Wall Street banker. But what if, after or instead of helping the spirit of white capitalism, Oda Mae was able to funnel that magic back into herself and into her community? Oda Mae Brown becomes magical because something slips into the sliver of flesh between fraud and authenticity. She has the gifts of her ancestors, but the knowledge that these gifts can be easily faked or co-opted. In some ways, Oda Mae's journey from fake psychic, surrounded by all the accoutrement of racialized magic, but possessing none of its spiritual substance, to begrudging miracle worker, makes her a perfect envoy for our image-conscious age of Instagram witches and influencer priestesses. In many ways, our virtual connections have achieved the kind of Afrocentric community that Oda Mae was denied in the film. However, Oda Mae reminds us that when we instrumentalize our spirituality as a personal brand, that we can conflate our spirituality with our identity, mistaking it for something that we are rather than something that we build. A recent surge of interest in Afro-diasporic religious and magical practice among gender-oppressed people, including Vodou and Yoruba cosmologies, as well as astrology, tarot, and plant-based medicine, is not dissimilar to the earlier spiritual explorations of the Black feminists discussed throughout this book. Now, as ever, our spiritual strivings are part of a continual pursuit for union with our estranged ancestors. Social media have made the belief systems of our ancestors more accessible than ever, but they have also made them into the visual markers of Black authenticity on platforms where identity has become synonymous with advertising and where our bodies can be used in the financial machinations of white guys just as surely as Oda Mae's was. Is that too depressing to end on? I could stitch it together with something more hopeful at the end, but I think I would like to end there because I'm not saying that's not the final word.
That's not the end.
But I just thought it was relevant to what we were just discussing. So.
Food for thought.
Yes.
For us talking about being uncomfortable, or if anyone's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Hello.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so grateful for this work. I always enjoy seeing the intersection of spirituality and feminism, Black women, our magic, all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And I just learned about this the other day. A friend sent it. I'm like, I gotta be there.
Thank you so much for
Thank
coming.
you for being
Yeah,
here.
thank you. And actually, what you just read is what's on my mind as somebody who I love Katherine Dunham. I wrote my thesis about Katherine Dunham and about this understanding of Black women from a womanist perspective, going back and getting parts of our ancestral history for community healing and using African dance as that. And one thing that was brought up here that I always have a question, being outside of the academic realm, because there's not a lot of space for the experience of the actual healer.
Yes.
That and having archives of that and having those experiences be more than what one of my professors, I went to Georgia State, called datum. He said to me, you're gonna have to either be somebody who's the scholar or somebody who's the datum, right? Okay, there's not room for that. And even your really beautiful points about what we see is because there's no space for archiving the experience of those who have been inside the traditions,
Mm-hmm.
you know, except for these luminaries that everybody kind of returns to for that knowledge, and having that archive be opened up. I mean, I guess this is like, please make space for like the actual experience of healers to be heard, more than just like the secondhand.
Yeah.
And that is how we're getting fooled, because we're not having the experiential. It's very different. You can tell, like, if you in it. I mean, everybody here like, we know who the fakers are on Instagram, because you don't feel right. Somebody right about that. You know, so towing this line is something I'm raising up. And I would love for you to come to the film premiere. I'm doing a movie, a documentary about Black women and Black wound healers in social justice movements, from Ray Sharp Brooks to Cop City. And the premiere of it is at the end of this month. And this is kind of me kind of saying, there's no space for my research in academia. How else can I do it? And a lot of like that mixing in of film and like the ways in which we've had to kind of slip it in the cracks because there's not enough space is a question for all of us in community. How can we bridge like this beautiful academic body of work and our luminaries with like what's actually happening on the ground, so people don't have to do as much bridging of their art, so the art can be reflective and not like imaginary, because people are actually doing it and have a lot to share, that we need that archive of what's actually happening. I share.
Please share.
I only have a few spots, so it's going to be at the Lola, but I can't, you know, it is not open invitation. But please, if you're interested, please let me know.
Can you come talk to me after?
Absolutely, I would love to. I was like, ooh, this movie that y'all are doing, I want to know about it. It sounds so super cool.
My
thanks
goodness.
for listening. It's less of a question than like a community raising.
But that's the point, right? You're exactly right. We don't need to be siloed or like this is serious or whatever. So thank you for sharing.
And just like as a quick response, I think you know, just kind of thinking with and learning from Katherine Dunham on that, I think one of my favorite moments in Island Possessed, her memoir, is when she, you know, because I think the 1920s is really the first time when, or like Katherine Dunham and Zora Neale Hurston are some of the first Black women researchers who aren't the datum. They aren't the subjects. They're the researchers. So they, I think in a lot of ways, really preciously guard their status as researchers and feel very afraid when the spiritual practices actually like tug at them, you know. So Katherine Dunham one time was like, you know, literally like Dambala, the snake spirit, is like her, is like the spirit that she's pledged to, but she doesn't want to get possessed and do the dance because she's worried what people will think of her. But then she's also worried what her informants will think of her if she doesn't get possessed, and they're going to think that she's being fake with them. But then she just ends up dancing, and she's a really great dancer, and she doesn't say that she's possessed, but she says that people appreciate her contribution through the dancing. And it's this kind of intermediary zone where she's kind of the researcher, but she's also the participant, that I found really beautiful. And that, you know, I think, I don't know, I wouldn't say there's not, I mean, then as now, there's just not a lot of space for that blurring of the line within academia, but people still find ways. It's just not really rewarded or encouraged, but I mean, it still happens.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you for this very rich conversation, Holly. I am a first year grad student at Emory, and I'm really excited to be here with you and to come across your work. And so please bear with me because I'm also practicing how to ask questions. But I was really excited to come across your writing of Hansberry and Simone's relationship in the archives, and kind of your reading practice and thinking about I think I might be saying it wrong, but the plaisir between the two of them. You go on to write when Nina writes to be young, gifted, and Black, and she's thinking about Lorraine, and it's a kind of like ritual making, and in that ritual making, she kind of meets Hansberry in a spiritual way, and you talk about them kind of being united at last with Simone's Simone's spirituality and Hansberry's politics, and that kind of being like a cumulative vision of revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And so my two questions are, for that context, one, how did you feel when you came across that in your reading practice and kind of seeing it as like this act of a pleasure practice between Simone and Hansberry?
Mm-hmm.
And in thinking about our own archives, how would you suggest or what are some gems that you can offer us in terms of what it means to read our own archives and remember our ancestors, or to think about what could be possible in terms of ritual making for ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for that question and that really attentive reading. I have, it's so funny. I have a real tenderness towards Lorraine Hansberry in a way, just because, like, I think I have a kind of different relationship to her than some of these other figures because she died so young, I think, and because, I think her archive, every time it gets resurrected, people are like, oh, it's unfinished, or, I think people always kind of are a little bit down on on post-Raisin Lorraine Hansberry and are like, oh, she wasn't quite done, and maybe if she'd had longer to think about things, maybe. But I think this kind of like snapshot of this kind of like anxious young lesbian communist feels so, it feels so like a type of person that I know and want to embrace or do embrace actively in my daily life. But I think Hansberry is somebody who's very uncomfortable with pleasure because she, I think, has probably been told in the political circles that she runs in that it's unprincipled. There weren't a lot of Black women in her particular, I guess, like, I don't know, in her particular experiences with Black male communists like Paul Robeson, or with like the kind of white Greenwich Village set. So I think kind of, I think Nina Simone is actually the only emergence of a Black woman, or like a Black woman friendship that I've seen in Hansberry's archive and writing. So it's almost like I wanted to make them talk to each other because the pleasure, I don't know, I feel like Simone was almost like the kind of key to unlock the pleasure that Hansberry as a Taurus and other things wanted so deeply to access, but just publicly I think didn't. But I just like to imagine, I think, that space of intimacy between her and Simone as something that really deeply informed her, like her lesbian writing that she wrote under a pseudonym. But I think there's like a reason why she wrote that lesbian writing under a pseudonym and didn't avow it. I don't know. But it's really interesting to me that, I don't know, lesbianism, Black women friendship are this kind of apocryphal information to her archive, whereas the like more politically serious, like whatever, like, I mean, even if you just read the characters in her published plays besides Raisin, just Black women are not very, I don't know, they're just represented a little oddly, like to put it charitably. They're not represented as the primary politically motivated figures of her later plays, I think, because I think she just had like a real doubt within herself. Like, I think she felt like her desire was unprincipled, and that actually makes me really sad because I definitely see people think that today as well.
Thank you.
We have a virtual question from Helen Pena.
Hey, Helen. Thanks for coming.
Perhaps that you may even know this question that Helen's going to ask, but Helen says, can you speak more about Vodou feminism, Vodou belonging, and the centering of Haiti in the book?
Oh, that is a great question. So I had originally wanted to write a book where I put where I put Black American feminists more in conversation with Haitian writers. I mentioned in my introduction, like there are a lot of contemporaries, actually, like Haitian women writers who are writing at the same time as some of these figures, like Suzanne Commerce-Sylvain, who is a folklorist, who is doing a lot of the same work, for example, as Zora Neale Hurston, Katherine Dunham in the same time period. Marie-Vieux Chauvet, like very powerful novelist, right? And contemporary figures as well. But I just actually couldn't write that book because the conversations were parallel rather than intersecting. Like, it's like people just weren't actually meeting each other to have the conversations, which, I think is like just kind of a sad reality. Another kind of resource scarcity, just in terms of travel, fellowships, etc., translation also being an access issue. So if Haiti feels spectral in this book, sometimes it felt a little too spectral to me, because I felt like a lot of the writers that I'm writing about really liked Haiti as an idea, but didn't really understand Haiti as a place. I would say Katherine Dunham probably got the deepest into Haiti as a place because she spent the most time. She was able to buy property there. And I think she probably spoke the best Creole, but a lot of these writers who, have some imagining of Haiti never actually went to Haiti. But also, it kind of reminds me of, I don't want to also dismiss their vision either. Because, even if it was second, third hand, I think Haiti as this kind of beacon of inspiration throughout the African diaspora is still really important, even if people aren't able to go, even if people don't necessarily understand the full history. I feel like it's not inaccurate to how Haitians view themselves and what they have fought for. I think even if people are not able to go, not able to read French, not able to speak Creole, whatever, I think the vision of Haiti's liberatory potential is still really powerful and really important. And even like the kind of tensions that I keep talking about, all the discomfort, unease, etc. Like I think people, I don't know, I don't want to speak for people, but I think sometimes, especially people who are not initiated into African diasporic spiritualities can kind of think of it almost like, I don't know, there's almost this kind of like spirit animal narrative or something where it's like, oh, like I'm going to reconnect with my ancestors and Oshun is my, like, like there's this kind of narrative that represents it as a return. But I think for Vodou especially, I can't speak as much towards Orisha-centered practices, but for Vodou especially, like Vodou is hard. It's full of violence and contradiction, and not for the sake of violence, but for the sake of modeling what the real world actually is and what human relationships actually are. Like one of the first prayers that you hear in a Vodou ceremony is, "We crossed the ocean and we're not African anymore." Like some kind of variation on that sentiment, depending on who's singing it. So Vodou, I think, is also a religion that deeply knows that. It's a very non-essentialist religion. It's a non-essentialist and anti-authenticity religion. It's full of complexity and shards and jagged edges. And I think even if most figures in this book weren't direct practitioners, I think they were in line with the sentiment.
One more question to close us out, anyone? All right.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a junior at Emory University, and I just wanted to ask if you have any comments or ideas on writers, activists now who you think are carrying on this sort of very important work in the present day?
Oh, that's a really lovely question. You might have to.
It's kind of hard. Like, I think it's kind of hard to, because there's so much media now, it's almost hard to like pick out certain people in the way that you can when you look back in the past. But
Yeah. I mean, I guess a few of the people that I wrote about in the book are still living, so there's always that. I think, you know, Alice Walker obviously was a kind of early, I mean, I do kind of maybe have some critique. I had some critiques of Alice Walker in the book if you made it that far to the end. But you know, I think just a really important figure for a Black woman-centered theology, I think, and still active. Same with Yeye Louisa Tiche, who is also in the book as well. I think a Haitian thinker that I want to recommend is Mimrose Beaubrun, who has written 2 books, I think one of which has been translated into English, about her own spiritual initiation within Vodou, and that's a really beautiful, comprehensive account, you know, and she just has obviously as a Haitian person who speaks Creole, like the kind of access that she has to like a theological complexity is just kind of unparalleled. Or definitely, you know, it's just a more complex vision than anything anyone in this book has, like, to be honest, because, you know, she speaks the language and is from the culture herself, and she is a contemporary writer and singer. So I think those are the ones right off my head, but you know, I think we can definitely probably crowdsource some more public facing and like social media figures, because I also don't want to knock the public facing and social media figures either. I don't know if I have any that I can personally vouch for, but some of y'all might want to give some suggestions.
Anybody want to shout anything out? All right. Well, thank you all so much for your beautiful questions. I want to let folks who are watching at home know that you can click the teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy We Pursue Our Magic, A Spiritual History of Black Feminism from Charis Books and More. There is a beautiful cover in Holly's hands. So that's one click and you got it, and we'll send it to you. And while supplies last, we'll try and get some signed ones to you if possible. So thank you so much for watching with us tonight. We're going to go ahead and say goodnight to you.